Welcome to the Week 1 lecture on Chapter 1, Understanding Our Environment, from your textbook, Principles of Environmental Science. Before we get started with the Chapter 1 information, I'd like to go over a few tips on how to succeed in an online course, since taking a course online is a bit different than taking a course on campus. So a few tips here are: 1, start the quarter out right. And make sure from the very beginning in this class and any of your other online courses that you know what your expectations are, you know what the due dates are, and what assignments you'll need to be doing each week. You can do this by, as we have here on the next pointer down, reviewing the calendar each week. So check into that calendar and the list of things you should be doing each week, and make sure that you stay on top of those assignments and due dates right from the beginning. That'll help establish a pattern of hours and days that you are going to get your work done, and help you hopefully do that each week and continue to get your assignments done on time each week and be successful in that area. Next is create a dedicated place for your studies. So make sure that you have a place and a time that's quiet, that you can actually get your work done, and that you're not going to be either bothered by other noises or other things going on in the house or wherever you're located, so that you can be productive with getting your work done. Next, achieve a school and family balance. I think this is one of the most important factors to success, since most people that are taking online courses have either a lot of work commitments or family commitments that are preventing them from being on campus during the normal hours. So if you have lots of other things going on in your life, trying to set at a time that side where you can work and be productive with your work and don't have other commitments that you're trying to be thinking about during your work time can help you be productive. And next here, stay on schedule. I think this is one of the other most important factors to success. So make sure that you know what's going to be due for the week and that you stay on top of those assignments. If you get behind one week, the next week you're trying to get done that week's assignments and the previous week's assignments, and that can be impossible or very overwhelming. Next here, stay motivated. This can be a struggle. I just mention it now just so you're aware of it, but I think a lot of people, we start off strong, and then as the weeks go on, we tend to get either overwhelmed or just ready to be done with the quarter. And trying to stay motivated and keep on top of your assignments from week 1 to week 10 is really important, so that you don't have a drop in your grades at some point. One way I could recommend trying to help out with this is, if you have a week where you don't have a lot going on in your classes, try to get ahead a little bit. So maybe get a couple chapter outlines done in advance, so that when you get to one of those weeks that's very challenging and you're feeling overwhelmed, you are at least caught up on something, and you can have maybe a little breathing room or take a break when you need it. Next here is participate. So I think the more that you participate in the course, and the more that you will get out of the course. So interacting with myself, interacting with other students will help you think about the material more, help you feel more involved in the course, and not feel like you're just sitting out on a Bermuda island doing work all by yourself. Because online classes can be isolating if you don't have some of that interaction with the instructor and other students. Next here, get help. So please use my office hours or send messages whenever you feel like you are struggling or have a question. So it's much better to ask lots of questions and get the answers you need than sit around for hours trying to struggle with an assignment. So I do have my set office hours, so you'll know that you can get a hold of me on Monday from 8 to 9 or Thursday from 9 to 10. But I do get on Learning House quite frequently other than that, and will be responding back to messages. So if you have a question, please feel free to send those my way. And then I'll go over on the next slide a little bit about the study area in the course. So looking for study partners can also be very helpful. Lots of studies have shown that students who work together and study with other students do much better in their classes than students who work alone. And that's just probably because you have someone to talk over things with, things that are confused. You can get questions answered quickly, and it's a little more interactive learning than just trying to do the material by yourself. I'd like to encourage you to work together throughout the term. As I said, I think it would be beneficial to you to have one or more people that you can get together with and work on assignments, talk about the course. So I have set up a student study area in the main center area of Learning House. So what you'll do is there's a discussion forum here, and you can just write in that area when you're available to meet, what times, what days, and hopefully someone else, one or more people will respond back to you, and you can pick a time to meet. And then once you've picked your time, you'll just log into the student study area here, and you can work on any course assignments and labs, anything else that you need to work on, questions for the course. So I'm offering up to 5 points of extra credit per week for working together, because I really think that working together will help you out, but I want to give you a little incentive to actually do that and try it out. So once you've met up with someone, just let me know that you've met, who you met with, and for how long, and I'll enter in your extra credit. And like I said, up to 5 points per week for working together with someone. So overall, I think that it will make your life easier, and you can get extra credit on your assignments. So hopefully it's a win-win. I hope you'll try it out. And if you do try out the working together and use a chat room in week 1, I will throw in a free assignment pass. So for a lecture assignment, so you can use it for your chapter outline or weekly discussion. If you let me know that you met up, like I said, in week 1 with someone, then you'll get a free pass to help you out later on in the course. By the end of this week, hopefully you will be able to answer the questions below, which include describing several current environmental problems, listing some examples of environmental progress, explaining what sustainability means, explaining the steps of the scientific method and why scientists use the scientific method, what critical thinking is and why it's important in environmental science, and identifying some people who help shape our ideas of resource conservation and preservation, and understanding the difference between conservation and preservation, and understanding why they promoted these ideas when they did. The first thing I'd like to do for the course is define the term environment. Since this is environmental science, it would be nice to know what that word environment means. And environment is just the living and non-living things around us. So non-living things include air, water, food, soil, weather, noise, really anything that is around you that is not alive. And the living things in the environment include things like plants, animals, people, and all other living things such as bacteria, viruses. And environment can be very small to very big. So your environment can contain everything from just the very immediate surroundings around you, such as the house you live in, up to the community that you live in would also be your environment, and up to the whole world you live in, because whether you're looking at a small or large scale, your environment or surroundings impact you. So it's easy to see usually the impacts of the things right in our house or our town, but also things going on around the world also impact weather, air quality. And so on a small or a large scale, your environment tends to impact you in some way. So looking at our environment, we live in a very beautiful place, and most of us most likely take that for granted. We kind of assume things are the way they are, they'll stay the way they are, and we don't really think of the alternative. But we want to make sure that where we live and how it looks and the beauty that we live in doesn't become this. So that's one of the main reasons we study environmental science, is because we want to make sure that we know how to keep our world and our environment looking nice and being a nice place to live. One question that's good to ask at the beginning of the course is why we study environmental science. And the reason that we study environmental science is because we want to make sure that, one, that our surroundings and where we live, our environment, can stay this beautiful. As I said, we live in a really beautiful place, and we want to make sure that we keep that beauty around us. But also, and very importantly to us, we want to make sure that we have food to eat, that we have clean water to drink, and a healthy place to live. And environmental science, for a definition for you, is the study of our environment and our place in it. And through environmental science, we can better understand our world, the impact of our actions on our world, and how to make sure that our environment stays the way that we want it. So this is a book by someone called Aldo Leopold called this, and the book is a Sand County Almanac. And Aldo Leopold was one of the a main environmental person earlier in the 1900s, and he wrote a lot of comments about environmental studies and land management. And here's just a few quotes from him that I thought were interesting for the course. He said that we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. And I think that's an important theme in the course, is that we don't just look at the land as having things that we can use, but that we are an integral part of the land, and all of our actions have an impact on our environment. And another quote that I just thought was interesting here for this course is, there are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other that heat comes from the furnace. And while that may be not quite as true in this community, there are a lot of people, especially in larger cities, that they really don't think about where their food or heat or anything else comes from, and don't realize the importance of their environment in providing the things that they need for day-to-day life. For your week one discussion, you're going to be looking at one of Aldo Leopold's other quotes from his book. So I've put up a few other quotes in your week one discussion, and you'll be looking at that quote and analyzing that for your week one discussion. And if you ever do need a good book to read, this is a very easy to read, fairly short book, and it's a pretty interesting book. Mentioned, environmental science is the study of our environment and our place in it. And when we study environmental science, we usually need to look at a lot of different fields of study in order to understand what's going on, how to make changes, and how to make changes that the society where that problem is occurring is actually willing to make the changes necessary. So one of the main things that you study in environmental science is biology, or understanding what living things are in the area and how they're impacted by whatever issues going on. Ecology is similar. We're looking at all the living things and how they interact. We need to understand the chemistry in the area, so what nutrients or other, like oxygen levels, are important to helping those living things thrive. But then other fields of study that are not science related, we also need to understand the economics of the problem. And usually it comes down to dollars and cents on what communities are willing to do and spend in order to solve a problem. And a lot of times environmental problems, as you'll watch in one of the video links here on the Apo Island fisheries problem, it comes down to sometimes the problem is important to people's livelihood in the area. We also need to look at political science, so what laws are important to making sure that the environment stays protected. And then you also have to look at anthropology and religion. So there's a lot of cultural things that come into play on people in a specific area, and you need to take into account what people in that area believe, how they think, in order to work on creating solutions to problems that actually work in a community. Because environment takes so many different things into account, such as the culture of the people in an area, the economics of an area, the different organisms that are present in an area, one of the best ways to study environmental science is to study it in the context of real places. So we can come up with certain generalizations, but really all these things need to be taken into account when you're looking at a specific problem. So we will be looking at actual real places quite a bit through this course. And you will be provided links to different places so you can look at them on Google Earth. And I think it makes it a lot more interesting to actually see what these places look like as you study them. So I would recommend that you try out those links and see what the places that we're talking about look like. As I mentioned, one of your video links is to watch a short video on the marine fisheries around Apo Island. And just to give you a little bit of brief history, Apo Island is an island in the Philippines, and about 30 years ago, they started having catastrophic declines in their fisheries. And most of the people in that area relied on fishing for their livelihood. And as the fisheries started decreasing, they started using more and more destructive methods to protect the fisheries. So they started using like banging on the coral to try to get the fish to come out. And as they damaged the coral more and more and damaged the environment that the fish lived in, they had less and less fish. And so, as you'll see in the video, they came up with a solution of having a marine reserve or a protected area. And I don't want to ruin the whole video for you, but this was one of the world's first marine reserves, and it was very effective. But they did have to look at a lot of things in the area, such as the community, the economics. As we mentioned, all these fields came into play into making this solution work for the people on this island. So when this lecture is done, go ahead and click on that link and watch the video on Apo Island. The first section in this chapter is meant to help you understand some of the serious environmental problems going on currently, such as overfishing and deforestation, and you'll also learn about some solutions to problems that we've had. So we tend to focus on the negative, but there are some good things going on in the world today too. Section 1.2 in your text covers some different current environmental problems that we're having, and also some opportunities or some areas in which we are solving some of our past environmental problems. And we'll start out by looking at some of the current environmental problems. And one of the main problems that we have right now is that our population is large and getting larger, and with that we need to have food for all of these people and get rid of the waste created by all of these people. And we've increased at a really rapid rate, and so that creates a challenge on how do we make enough food for all of these people and get the food that we do make to those people. If you look at our population, we have over 7 billion people on the earth and getting larger by about 80 million people each year, which it has our numbers have doubled over about the past 40 years. They project that our population will be between 8 and 10 billion by 2050. If you want to go to an interesting site, there's a site that I've put a link on here for a world population counter. If you go to the site, I would recommend just watching the counter for just a minute. It's very interesting to just see our world population in real time, just increasing up, up, up. And I would also recommend that you look at the yearly births versus deaths. That's very interesting to look at, because if our births and our deaths were equal, our population would not increase. But when our births are more than our deaths, that's when population does increase. When I made the slideshow on Wednesday of last week, our population was at 7,369,063,141. And take a look at just over the last week or so how that number has increased. Other problems that we have are concerns with climate change. So normally there's a certain amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide, that help trap heat and make our Earth a nice warm temperature. But when we get too many of these greenhouse gases, too much heat is trapped and can't be released from the Earth, and that's when our temperatures go up. And so there's concern about with our increased pollution and increased greenhouse gases that our climate is getting warmer and what that will do to our Earth in the future. Another main environmental problem is hunger, and it may not be an issue as much of being able to produce as much food as being able to get the food to the people who need it. But overall, we have a lot of people on this Earth, and 850 million people are chronically undernourished, and at least 60 million people face major food shortages due to weather, politics, or war every year. So hunger is a major problem worldwide. Lack of clean water is another major problem. Water may become one of our most critical resources of the 21st century. At least 1.1 billion people, or 1 in 7 people, currently lack access to clean water, and at least twice that many don't have adequate sanitation. So dirty water leads to the approximately 15 million deaths every year, and most of them are children under age 5. So with dirty water come a lot of diseases and a lot of health problems for people in the world. Another environmental problem is decreasing energy resources. So we rely a lot on fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas, and they provide about 80% of the energy used in industrialized countries. But these fuel supplies are decreasing, and with that, the prices of, as we all know, like gas prices going up. So we need to look at having alternative energy resources as we deplete our fossil fuel resources. Another problem going on in the world today is air pollution. And air quality has gotten dramatically worse in some of the newly industrialized areas such as China and India. And they've estimated that at least 3 million people die each year from diseases triggered by air pollution. So air pollution can be a very serious environmental threat, and they say that in California, about 75% of the smog actually originated in Asia. So when we talked earlier about some environmental problems being small scale, some being large scale, this is an environmental problem that's large scale, and something that's happening very far away can impact our day-to-day lives. Another environmental problem is biodiversity loss, and biodiversity is the number of different living organisms that you have in an area, and due to habitat destruction or overexploitation, such as overfishing or pollution, we've seen a lot of our different species declining. And we estimate that about 800 animal species and about 10% of all plant species, or around 10,000 species, so about 800 animal species have disappeared, at least 10,000 species are now threatened, and about 10% of all plant species have disappeared in about just the last century. So biodiversity loss is, like I said, an important environmental problem that we need to think about today. And one of our last problems that we list here on the slide is the loss of marine resources. And the reason this is so important is that about 1 in 7 people in the world, their main source of protein is fish from the ocean or other ocean species. So loss of marine resources and marine habitat means that a lot of people out there aren't getting the food source and the protein that they need. On the other hand, some good things going on right now. There is a decreased pollution worldwide and increased health worldwide. So we're seeing a decrease in major diseases like smallpox and polio, and this has increased the worldwide life expectancy. We're seeing stabilized birth rates through education and increasing sources of renewable energy such as wind and solar powered energy. Decreased forestation, or at least in some countries that were having major deforestation, they're beginning to have an awareness of the problems associated with deforestation, having more protection of marine resources, and overall it's important to keep in mind that a lot of this is possible through increased education. So education is an important key to environmental protection. One main goal in environmental science is sustainability, which means that we are meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. So we are using the resources at a rate that will leave resources for the future generation to be able to live quality lives. So now we're going to move on to some of the main important people who have shaped environmental science through the last couple of centuries. And starting off the list here, we have Aldo Leopold, and he was one of the greatest thinkers on conservation, and realized that a lot of conservation is not just dealing with managing the resources, but we have to manage the people and our demands on the resources. So realizing that human impact on the environment and our way of thinking is critical in managing the environment. So the U.S. contains less than 5% of the world's total population, but consumes about a quarter of most resources in the world. So that's something to think about, is the affluent societies overall that aren't a lot of the population but are consuming a lot of the resources, and a lot of the rest of the world is looking to want to be like the us, that affluent society. And as some of the developing nations start to become more developed and consume more goods, we need to look at what those effects will be on the rest of the planet, and look at our own use of goods and how much we do use. Countries with the highest average income, like the US, make up only 10% of the world's population, but more than 70% of the world's population, or about 5 billion people, live in countries where the average yearly income is less than $5,000 per year, so about a tenth of the US average, and this includes countries such as China and India with huge populations. Being an affluent society is kind of good and bad. With being affluent, we have a lot of knowledge and education to help make very positive changes in our world. But on the flip side of that, most affluent societies use a very disproportionate share of the planet's resources, as you can see in this comic here. Unfortunately, the indigenous people throughout the world are often some of the least powerful and most neglected groups, especially politically. And a lot of countries are decreasing the habitats that these people live in, leading to decreased areas for them to live and decreased numbers of indigenous people. And the indigenous people have valuable knowledge of the ecosystems and of the animals who live there. Overall, we rely on science to help us understand our environment, and science is a process for producing knowledge based on observations. And in general, scientists should be skeptical until there's evidence to support an idea. So they shouldn't just believe something that they hear until they know that there's evidence to support that. And scientists also aim to be methodical and unbiased. Sometimes it's hard because we all as people have certain opinions, but the goal is that we do experiments that don't allow our opinions to sway the results, and that we have methodical experiments that follow certain steps and hopefully get good, valid results. Scientists also do experiments and rely on reproducibility, which means that you get the same result over and over again. So you're not just relying on one result that could be a fluke. When you tend to get the same result over and over and over again, that means it's more likely that your idea is correct. The main goal in studying environmental science is to learn how to make the world around us a nice place and provide all of our needs and be a nice place that we can live. So through environmental science, or through science in general, we can study, for example, how to produce more food to get greater crop yields. We can learn how to clean up polluted areas, examine the effects of greenhouse gases, and there's a lot of things that we can study to help make sure that when we're taking care of our environment, that we're doing it the best way possible. And the way that we go about doing this is by using the scientific method. The way that we do science is typically through the scientific method, and this is just looking at the steps that you take when you're examining a problem. The first step is that you make an observation. So for example, you notice your flashlight doesn't work and you ask yourself what might be wrong. Then you propose a hypothesis, which is just a possible answer to your question, or what you think the right answer would be. And your hypothesis could be the flashlight doesn't work because the batteries are dead. Then you will do an experiment to test your hypothesis. So the experiment would be, if you replace the batteries, then the flashlight should work. You'll collect data from your test. After you replace the batteries, did the light turn on? And you'll come up with a conclusion where you interpret that data, or you interpret your results. If the light works now, then your hypothesis was right. It was the batteries. If the flashlight doesn't work, then you need to formulate a new hypothesis. Perhaps the bulb has gone out or something else, and then test for that new hypothesis. And the final step would be reporting for peer review. So one important element in science is that you put your results out to the general scientific community. They can try to reproduce those results and see if they get the same results as you did. One thing that is important in science is having an experimental design that reduces bias. So for example, if you are in a health experiment and know that you're getting a drug that's supposed to help a certain condition, a lot of times the placebo effect comes into play, where because you're thinking you're taking a drug that's going to work, your body actually will have changes and it will appear that the drug is working. So through blind or double-blind experiments where neither the experimenters or the person getting the drugs knows what they're getting, it can help reduce bias. And that way you can compare the groups that had a treatment done versus the groups that did not have a treatment done and see if there's a difference in those results. Science overall is cumulative. Usually good ideas don't just pop out of nowhere. They build and build on each other. And eventually there may be something called a paradigm shift, which is where there's a major change in scientific thought. And these do happen from time to time where there's enough building of knowledge and finally a major change in thought is accepted as the main, as the way things are. Critical thinking is very important in science in general, and especially environmental science, where you will hear a lot of claims. But what's important is critical thinking allows you to determine fact versus opinion. So as you hear things on television, as you read things, make sure that you are thinking for yourself and use your critical thinking skills to find out what the truth really is, rather than just relying on what you hear someone say. Especially in environmental science, there's a lot of appeals to emotion, or people telling stories that are very emotional, and you don't want to let these emotional appeals sway your thinking away from what the true facts state. In 1864, there's a publication called Man and Nature by George Perkins Marsh, and a lot of people consider this the beginning of our current environmental protection movement in North America. And Marsh warned about the consequences of all of our waste and destruction of resources, and largely because of his book, we started having national forest reserves in 1873 to protect timber supplies and endangered watersheds. Roosevelt and Pinchot began what we know as the conservation movement, and this was around the early 1900s, and Roosevelt and Pinchot believed that conservation is important, and conservation means that you are using your resources to an amount that the resources will still be there for the next generation. So it looks at the land and animals and plants as resources that should be used, but should be used in moderation and carefully. Pinchot was the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, and he essentially was at the beginning of the Forest Service movement. Next, we'll talk about John Muir, who was one of the main proponents of the national park system. So here is a picture of Roosevelt and his advisor, Gifford Pinchot, who later became the first chief of the Forest Service. And again, they're conservationists, meaning use the resources, but use them wisely. The preservation movement was really promoted by John Muir, who saw certain areas, such as the area around the Yosemite Valley, thought these areas were just amazingly beautiful and needed to be protected and not used at all. And so John Muir was the first president of the Sierra Club, and he argued that nature deserves to exist for its own sake. So the aesthetic and spiritual values that are a huge benefit to us. So looking at the beauty of nature and having it untouched by humans is very important. And that's considered preservation, where you leave the land alone and you try to manipulate it as little as possible. Aldo Leopold, I mentioned him earlier, he was a advocate for land ethic, and land ethic means that we look at how we use the land. We don't just treat the land as a resource, but we realize that the land and all the resources on the land are a great benefit to us as well, and we take that into account when we make decisions. So he was at the forefront of wildlife management and resource management in our country, and worked for several different agencies and groups promoting resource management and wise use of resources. Many different current environmental problems, such as poor air quality due to the burning of coal and increased pollution from chemical industries, led to our modern environmental movement. A lot of this was spearheaded by Rachel Carson, who published a book called Silent Spring in 1962. And this book made the public aware that a lot of these chemicals that we are using are toxic to humans and other species, such as DDT, which led to the eventual ban of DDT in our country due to its effects on bird species. And really, Rachel Carson's book was a major paradigm shift in our environmental movement because it did make people aware of the far-reaching negative consequences of some of these chemicals. Before this time, a lot of these chemicals like DDT were sprayed on people and used to treat things like lice and malaria, and they were probably very effective in that, but I would say it is a paradigm shift in that most of us would not be willing to go have our entire body sprayed with DDT to treat lice. So there's a picture of Rachel Carson. As I said, she wrote the book Silent Spring, which is a really important book in our modern environmental movement, especially for a female at that point to write and finally be taken seriously, because that was a hard point for her to actually have her ideas, which were majorly radical, different ideas at the time, be accepted, and to be accepted by a female at that time. So we've reached the end of chapter 1, and in conclusion, environmental science gives us the tools and ideas to understand the environmental problems that there are out there, and also to come up with solutions to these problems. We do face a lot of environmental problems, but we also have had some very positive changes in terms of protecting the environment, and continuing to work towards solutions to the problems that exist is a challenge for sustainability, but also a goal that many environmental scientists are working towards. And finally, science gives us an orderly way to approach problems and to work towards solving those problems and hopefully coming up with valid solutions. Lastly, there are some video links below this lecture. Please view these links when you can. The videos will be considered part of the lecture material for exam purposes, and they just cover some topics from the lecture material that we just covered. So as you go through the week and start working on your assignments, let me know if you have any questions, and good luck to all of you this quarter. I'll be in touch with you again in week 2.